This is the Welcome to Humanity podcast with thought leader and transformative psychiatrist, Dr. Fred Moss. This show focuses on the betterment of humanity on a global scale. Each episode will leave you enlightened, inspired, and ready to make an impact in your world. Welcome to the show. Welcome to your life. Welcome to humanity. Here's Dr. Fred.
You know, Sarah Safari is with us today, and the intention today is to really kick off what is likely to be an ongoing podcast that I'll be doing on a regular basis in the years to come. Ryan and I have been talking about podcasts for, maybe 3 to 5 years. I was on a podcast with Ryan long before podcasts were even close to popular. No one even knew what one was on the first time that I was on with Ryan and his friend Bo about 10 years ago, maybe even longer. It's just a thrill to be able to finally host my own podcast and for us to have reached a point in our development where that's what is being called for by the universe around me. And so today we have Sarah Safari with us. Sarah is a friend of both Ryan and me. Ryan, I should mention, is the co-producer of this particular podcast and many to come. And so Ryan knows Sarah from a previous setting where he had interviewed her because of how interesting she was. I met Sarah in a course that we were in together, a landmark wisdom partnership course. And I had met Sarah on the same week that Ryan wrote me to ask me if I knew Sarah. It was just like a tremendous amount of serendipity. I think it was the second weekend of the course where we had actually sat together a bit. And I got to learn a little bit about what this seemingly tiny woman of small stature is really up to in the world. And I can't wait to share that with my listeners, because as tiny and delicate as Sarah Safari is, she is, in fact, the absolute opposite of that. And so, again, it's just an honor, a pleasure to have Sarah Safari with us today. So thanks again for being with us today, Sarah.
Thank you. I feel so honored, and I'm really excited for this conversation that we are going to have.
Oh, beautiful. Thank you. Hey, it's Dr. Fred here. Before we dive into today's conversation with Sarah Safari, I just want to take a minute to let you know that I just finished putting together the audiobook version of my soon-to-be-released book called The Creative 8. So the book teaches a surprisingly simple method for healing that utilizes creativity and self-expression. As a listener to the Welcome to Humanity podcast, I want to give you a completely free copy of this audiobook as a thank you for listening to the show. Go to welcometohumanity.net/creative. I've used this Creative 8 methodology with both psychiatric patients and coaching clients alike for several years, and I get fantastic results. The method takes less than 5 minutes per day to implement. I know you're going to love it. Download your free copy of the Creative 8 audiobook today at welcometohumanity.net/creative. Now, let's get back to our conversation with Sarah Safari. Let's get right started. I mean, let me say a couple things. You know, Sarah, I didn't know who you were. And it's kind of funny that if people don't know who someone is, then they don't know what it is that they're up to in the world. And we make our assumptions. In fact, you know, we see someone who looks some certain way or dresses some certain way or talks a certain way, and then we make our assumptions about what they're up to. And I think more than anyone I've ever met, you were a source for me of my pre-assumptions not being accurate. I still had you as a wonderful person, but I sure didn't have you as the front edge trailblazer that you are and really what you're up to on the planet. So I can't wait to hear a little bit more about where you are these days, even if it's different than where you were before. And so you can tell my listeners and tell our listeners a little bit about what moves you and what turns you on and what you're up to in the world. So thanks again.
Thank you. Thank you for all your kind words and nice, beautiful, very, very kind and sweet introduction that you gave. I get that a lot. Every person that meet me in person first, after a bunch of emails or phone calls, they're like, we thought you should have been a little bit taller and bulkier. How come you're just so small? And I'm like, I don't know.
Right. You are, because you are who you are. That's, I
Yeah,
guess, what did.
exactly. But this journey, this amazing journey that it hasn't finished, and I'm learning every single day, and I'm making millions of mistakes every single day, is it started 7 years ago out of participating in a landmark course.
Hmm.
In the class, the leader said, come up with a project that is so big and huge beyond yourself, something impossible. And I was just sitting in my chair thinking, what is something impossible for me? And I thought about many, many, many things, but none of them sound impossible to me until somebody behind me started talking about Mount Everest.
Mm.
And I just heard the word Everest and the light went off in my brain. I thought, that's it. This is the impossible, because I've never been hiking before. I don't even have a pair of hiking boots. I hate cold weather. I've never been camping. This is so out of my comfort zone that I'm 100% sure I'm not going to do this. And
Hmm.
that I was just supposed to pick something impossible. So I just picked that. And the leader said, you don't have to accomplish it tomorrow. Just take the first step. And it was
Sarah, just to put this in perspective, at least for our listeners, can you tell us how tall you are?
I'm 5'4".
Yeah, you really are, and that's stretching, right? I mean, you're kind of small, and how about how old you are, Sarah?
Well, I'm 38 years old.
And on this lifetime, I think, right? As
Yeah,
38 years old.
I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. And okay, well, let's continue. Let's hear a little bit more of what happened after you decided to take this first step, because our listeners probably think they have an idea where this thing is ending up. A little do they know. So please continue.
So I kind of, the first few mountains that I was climbing, I kept failing and failing and failing, and I never made it to the top of any of the mountains. And at one point, I decided to quit. I just thought, this is not for me. I'm not supposed to be a mountain climber. I don't even have any experience. Let's just quit. And this is just, I'm skipping a lot of stories here that later on we can come back and dig deeper into these stories. But just to give you a highlight of the whole story, the whole big picture, I decided to quit. And the same day that I decided to quit, I got a new job offer to teach electrical engineering and computer science at California State University, Fullerton.
Right. Congratulations. Great job.
Thank you. And so I started teaching, and 2 weeks into the teaching program, I kind of was bored and I was looking for another faculty who could go hiking with. And it's funny, everybody introduced me to the same person, and I went to his office and I realized that he's the founder of the organization called Empower Nepali Girls.
Mm.
And 17 years ago, he went to Nepal to do a research about maternity with one of his PhD students. And he realized that some of the girls disappear from rural villages, from the schools at the age of 12.
Mm.
And he realized that there is this belief that men who are HIV positive, they think that if they sleep with a virgin girl, their HIVs get treated and they get well. So they buy the girls really cheap, like $50. The girls get raped, they get diseases. And even if they survive and go back to their villages, they can never have a normal life.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
I was sitting in my chair. I was just looking for another faculty to go hiking with. And this is what I'm hearing.
Yeah.
Like my whole life turned upside down. I just couldn't go back to my normal life knowing that this is happening. So therefore, I just told him, I surprised myself by saying again, you know what? I was training for Everest. I decided to quit because I didn't have enough motivation to train for such a thing. But now, hearing this story, I want to raise money for these girls. I'm going to raise $1 per foot of any mountain that I climb, including Everest, to raise funds for these girls to continue their education. And he told me that the cost for one girl to go to school one whole year is $170. And I
Okay.
realized it's just so easy to make a difference in Nepal. I just thought, even if I only raised $29,000, which is the elevation of Everest, 29,000 feet, that's enough for 150 girls. And even if I do that, I would be happy. So that's
Yes.
how it started.
All right. So that's great. And now you've kind of wet the whistle of our listeners by letting us know that, of course, that's just how it started. And I think everyone knows that, or everyone, I'm sure, anticipates that something like you getting to the summit of Everest took place. And in fact, something like you getting to the summit of Everest did take place, among many other things, however.
Yeah.
That also took place on the side. And since you've done that, can you tell us a little bit more about some of the excitement or some of the surprises that you might have met on the way up Mount Everest?
Yeah, so I trained and trained and trained, and I climbed many, many, many mountains. And finally, I was ready for Everest. And when I was climbing Everest on April 25th, 2015, at 20,000 feet, a 7.8 earthquake struck us.
Hmm.
And so I was climbing an ice wall. So imagine me climbing on a straight wall. It's like 30 feet wall. It's only ice in the most unstable part of Everest, Kumbu ice fall. It looks so dangerous because there are pieces of ice, size of a tower, size of a car, who are hanging, and at any moment they can break down.
Wait a minute. Now, you said it looks dangerous. Can you actually tell me something like it's not as dangerous as it looks? Because that sounds about as dangerous as anything there is on the planet right there to be climbing up
It is
that.
pretty dangerous. Yeah.
Even when there's not a 7.8
Yeah,
earthquake
even
going on. Yeah.
without, yeah, exactly. Even without a 7.8 earthquake, they always tell us to walk as fast as we can because that part is pretty dangerous. So
Okay.
imagine, it's so unstable. Even without the earthquake, there are so many avalanches happening all the time. And now there's a 7.8 earthquake, and I'm not just standing on my feet. I'm hanging from from an ice wall. And if your listeners have watched Game of Thrones, the ice wall in Game of Thrones, that's a kind of an ice wall that I'm talking about.
Okay.
Uh, so, anyway, the earthquake happened.
Oh, Sarah. Oh my God.
So, like, imagine at that moment, the only thing that I'm thinking about is, did I ever get any training for an avalanche, earthquake, combined on an ice wall at 20,000 feet? And I'm searching my brain. I don't have any
Right.
information. I don't know what to do with this.
Right. No, not your average education there. Not
Yeah.
not not too many people have been trained on what to do when that occurs. That's right. That's right.
And so I couldn't see anything. I couldn't breathe because there were like bunch of avalanches happening at the same time. There are pieces of ice falling down, and the noise that they made was like a rocket taking off. It was so loud and scary.
Mm,
I couldn't breathe and I couldn't see anything. And I just climbed up past the edge, clipped myself to the anchor, and I thought, this is it. This is the end. I'm gonna be
yeah.
buried alive under the snow, and there is no chance. And like movies, I saw my whole life right in front of me.
Right. Hmm.
And I was really upset because I thought, oh my God, so many people told me not to go and I didn't
All
listen.
right. Yeah, that's interesting, Sarah. Just taking a moment about this, your recall of this exact second in time that you're talking about. I also was in a nothing like this, but pretty. If it wasn't being compared to this, it would have been a pretty hair raising event myself that had me pretty certain that the end was seconds away. And what's so surprising to me when I recollect it is that what I was thinking at that time isn't about fear. Like you said, there were many people who warned you against this. And in some ways, you're letting them down, right? In some ways, it's like, oh,
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
should have known better. Some sort of shame or guilt is what showed up
Yeah.
rather than being afraid of death. Like you don't have time to be afraid. Am I right about that?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I felt extremely guilty, and I just thought, oh, I wasted my life.
Yeah.
But then at the same time I was a little bit happy, not happy, it was just a little bit of content, thinking, well, at least I'm dying for a good cause. At least I had a cause, and that might bring some awareness. But I wasn't thinking that right at that moment, but I think later on I
Hmm.
convinced myself that way. And so we couldn't continue, we couldn't go back down because all these ladders that we crossed, there are 50 ladders in Kumbu Icefall over crevasses, and they are extremely dangerous. So all these ladders were so unstable or broken or disappeared that we couldn't go back down. So we had to go continue up. And then finally, after 8 days, we got rescued and we went back down. And now I was extremely angry because I just raised money for the girls to continue their education. But that day, because of the earthquake, 10,000 people died, 100,000 people lost their homes. And so even the girls, they didn't even have enough food or water. So priority here wasn't education anymore. And
Hmm.
I was so worried for the girls, because this is the time that the traffickers, the human traffickers, that's
Ah,
exactly when during the disaster they can go to their
right.
families and say, well, you don't even have a place to stay and you don't even have money to feed your kids. Let us take care of them. And that's how it starts.
Now, let me put this in perspective. Did you stay in Nepal then when you got back down, or where were you? Where
Yeah.
were you physically? You stayed in Nepal.
Yeah, so we were in Kathmandu for after 8 days of finally arriving in Kathmandu. So, because from the place that we were, we took 3 different helicopters to arrive in Kathmandu, the capital of Nepal. And that's where some of our girls are. So, the Empower Nepali Girls organization, we have 300 girls in 14 different villages in Nepal. So now we arrived in Kathmandu, and I knew there are a bunch of our girls here in Kathmandu. So I went one by one, tried to find them to make sure they are still doing well and they have food and water and shelter and a place to sleep at night.
Hmm. Now, Sarah, were you with other people? Was there? Do I hear reference to a little bit of a team that you were with?
So in my climbing team, it was 6 of us plus 2 guides. And in my team, nothing happened to people in my team, but there were other teams that they lost people on the
Hmm.
mountain. But my team, nothing happened, thankfully.
But on the other hand, you did mention, I heard this right as well, that 10,000 citizens died
Yeah,
with this earthquake, and
yeah,
100,000 were lost their homes instantly.
yes, yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
Okay.
That's
All right.
exactly
That's quite a
on
picture you're painting. Keep going, please.
And then I came back down. I was extremely angry and traumatized. I just spent like 760 days of my life. Every single day I was training and fundraising. So if you met me 7 years ago, I was this very shy person. I couldn't even go to my mom and ask for $10. And now I had to go to perfect strangers and ask money for other perfect strangers that I don't even know. And it was just so out of my comfort zone. But since I wasn't asking for myself, it made it easier. So imagine, like, it's like 760 days. I'm fundraising every single day. I am training twice a day, every single day, to prepare myself for Everest. And then finally, when I'm on it, the earthquake happened. So I was disappointed, angry, sad. I was dealing with so many things. And I felt extremely guilty because now I could just fly back to United States to my comfortable house, but there are so many people homeless, so many people who lost their lives. I was just couldn't go back to my normal life for a few months after the earthquake.
Now, Sarah, for the sake of time, I think we glossed over I guess, 8 days. Is it 8 days between the initial earthquake and when you're down, or how long is it all the way?
8 days.
8 days. So in those 8 days, it was pretty harrowing, pretty hair raising. I've seen some videos that you've made, and extraordinary, just extraordinary. And what's more extraordinary for me as you speak to it is that your willingness to bypass the level of adventure that it took from getting where you were to where you eventually had to go. And so I just want to honor you as a human. I want you to get that. I really want to honor you as a human just for those 8 days. And I get that you're talking about in a subjective way that you weren't feeling that good about things when you got down. But just even getting down and whatever it took to go through all the transformation, and it did take a ton, Sarah, as you know, there's something about your humanity that has it be just an honor to have ever met somebody even who walked during those days to then create what you're about to tell us for the people who you now are committed to making a difference with. So I just want to thank you for your own personal humanity there, please.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
So I went to the town in Kathmandu with a group of my climbing team, and we were looking for the girls, trying to find how they're doing. Finally, we found a few of them. They were sleeping on dirt. And it was funny when I found the girls. Finally, the very first thing that I asked them was like, "Where were you sleeping? Do you have water? Did you eat food in the past 8 days?" And they said like some of the neighbors brought us some food, so they weren't complaining about not having water, not having a restroom, not having a place to sleep. The very first thing that they asked of me was when we can go back to school and continue our education.
Unbelievable.
Unbelievable. If it was me, I would ask for food and water and a shelter. I wouldn't care about
Yes.
school anymore. It was just so inspiring seeing how powerful and resilient they are. That it was just kind of, I have lots of pictures and videos of those moments that I would love to share with you in case you wanted to add it to this podcast. And I think it just that I got so inspired from their response and how they were dealing with this trauma, that I just thought I cannot be feeling low for them. I need to uplift them and I need to be stronger for them because they are strong for me. And I just said, you know what? And they were worried about me being on Everest and all that. And I kept telling them, don't worry, we're going to go back and we're going to build back all your homes and schools. And I'm gonna go back to Everest and I'm gonna climb it again. This life happened, this just happened, this was one incident. And they were just so responsive. Like when I think about those moments, I'm still processing. It's not that I
Yeah.
ever feel that I'm done with that. I'm still processing, I'm still learning, I still remember some of those things. And I think I'm gonna be processing this incident for the rest of my life. But
Sure.
every single time, I think the response that I got from the girls really helped me to move through the trauma and everything that I experienced.
Well, again, I don't want to interrupt you for too long, but I just want to, again, let you know that even as someone who's listening for the second or third time to some version of your history, your story here, I want you to get that just that story is thoroughly inspiring for me as a person, like what I'm up to in the world and what I'm holding back in the world and what I hold as, near and dear to me, like what really matters. And then what really matters for the people that it matters for. These are the kind of questions that instantly get posed in my head, and I imagine in my listeners' heads as well. So please continue. It's just a beautiful, beautiful story. Sarah Safari is with us today.
Thank you. And so I came back home and I decided, I thought this is a very important story and it needs to be shared with the rest of the world. So I decided to write a book. Wrote a book about the girls. The first book was Follow My Footsteps. And then I wrote another book called Above the Mountain's Shadow. And then I translated the book into Farsi in Iran. And then I wrote a textbook with my co-author, Dr. Jeffrey Cutler, about leadership. It's called Making a Difference for Universities. And I just thought I need to share this story. And I never, ever wanted to write a book in my life. I never looked at myself as an author or a writer, but I just thought there should be a way for me to share this story. And I cannot reach out to the rest of the world if I don't write a book. And if there is a person out there who's thinking about writing a book, I think all human beings, we have all great stories and unique stories, and we owe it to the rest of the world to share these stories. It doesn't have to be perfect. Perfect doesn't exist. But we can, I think we are responsible to share these stories with the rest of the world.
Just beautiful. Amen. Just fabulous advice, and coming from you, it's something almost that turns into a responsibility, almost an accountability or an opportunity that awaits all of us because our stories really are unique and beautiful. It's
Yeah,
fantastic.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So I decided I don't want to teach my girls to give up on life. So I told them, I'm going to go back and climb Everest, but not just Everest. I'm going to climb 6 more mountains on top of Everest. I'm going to climb the 7 highest peaks on 7 continents. And not just for empower Nepali girls, let's add the rest of the world. So I said, I'm going to climb for 7 organizations who are empowering women globally, and one by one I met different organizations, the leaders of the organizations in Europe, in Middle East, in Africa, all over the world, in United States, and I started fundraising for them, again same as before, $1 per foot of any mountain that I'm climbing for that organization to help the girls continue their education, or if the girls were victims of abuse and violence. It's been happening, it's been going so well. I'm meeting so many amazing great people. I'm failing, I'm learning, I am, and I say failing not in the negative way. This is just the verb that I'm using. It's really a positive word, because it means I'm trying really hard and I'm pushing myself and I'm learning more and more. It's been an amazing journey since then.
What is the term that you just defined for yourself? Say that word again.
Failing, fail like failure.
Oh, failing. Thank you.
Like, a lot of people ask me, how did you decide to do this? Or a lot of people ask me, why you aren't you scared of failing or not making your quota? And every single time I say, even if I save 1%, even if I can provide education for 1%, it's big enough, it's good enough for me. And I'm hoping to reach a higher number of people, but 1% is good enough, and I never allow this to stop me. That's what I was referring to.
Yes. So where is your trek path now? How many have you done? How many are in front of you? What's next? What are you doing?
So I climbed 6 out of 7, and my number 7 is really my number one, because number 7 is Everest.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
You've not been to the actual summit of Everest yet. Is that what you're saying?
exactly.
Interesting. Interesting.
Yeah,
Interesting.
yeah. So it's a work in progress, like everything else in life.
That's so interesting. You set out to like create a project for your landmark course, and you're like, I don't know, something. And then you're like, someone says Everest, and you get sparked. Yeah. That's what I'll do. I'll do the Everest thing. And then you sort of get some traction, and you're like, nah, no. And then a little bit, and then pretty soon there you are at the base, and then you're at base camp, and then you're actually doing it. The determination that's involved here, that like, I don't think there's anybody who's ever trained for Everest the way you did. And in the meantime, climb the 6 highest peak in 6 other continents. Am I right about that? Probably you don't know anybody who trained like that, still having not climbed Everest.
Mountain climb, we have a very small community of mountain climbers, but I know a lot of people who are climbing the 7 highest peaks and already achieved it. It's
Yes,
like there are a lot of people. I mean, a lot. I mean, in the sense
sure.
of the number of the climbers in the world. And since I'm in the community of the mountain climbers, and I have a lot of friends in that community, so I know a lot of people who are trying or already attempted or already summited all those mountains, or climbed some of them. So I know a lot of people, but
Now, Sarah, there are 7 continents on the planet, and one of those continents is Antarctica. Can you tell us a little bit about your Antarctica travels?
yeah, I climbed the highest peak in Antarctica, Mount Vinson, in 2018. Yeah, it's the coldest, the windiest, and the driest continent. On the summit, it was negative 54 degrees.
I'm sorry, I thought you said negative 54 degrees. I'm using new equipment. I was like, that is hilarious. What did you really say? I'm sorry about that.
I said negative 54.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it was cold. I kind of at any moment when we got to this summit, I didn't want to take my camera out and take a picture because I thought, I don't want to lose my fingers. I don't care about the picture on the summit.
Yeah.
I'm glad somebody else did take a picture of me, or I didn't have anything to prove that.
Wow. So you have some videos that you've done and some pictures that you've taken, some very beautiful pictures and videos. Can you want to tell us a little bit about some of the documentation, some of the storyline that you've laid down in all the multimedias, including this one today, but videos and books and talks that you've given? What kind of impact are you actually making these days on the world, and how are you expanding what your stand is out there?
Well, after a while of working with the organization Empower Nepali Girls, I realized that since my background, my bachelor's and master's was in electrical engineering, I just thought, I want to get some more knowledge around the area that I'm so passionate about. And I kind of never talked about the reason that I'm so passionate about this cause of women's empowerment and gender equality because I grew up in Iran and I experienced firsthand the oppressive, restrictive environment that makes gender discrimination possible.
Hmm.
And I just saw women around me never achieving their goals, not having the avenue to pursue their dreams. So it was very important for me to kind of give this opportunity to other young women around the world so that they can experience continuing their education, getting a job, being independent. And so I decided to do my PhD 4 years ago in leadership and change and focus on women's leadership in developing countries.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one of the products of me climbing Everest.
Mm-hmm. And so that's amazing. I didn't know that about you. I guess I want to put together another piece of information. Maybe you can shine a light on this for us. So you grow up in Iran, and you grow up, with just a firsthand view of what doesn't work for you. What doesn't work for any of us really with the gender inequality. And I wonder, like, what is the trek for Sarah Safari from Iran to PhD? There must be some summits there, if you will, that you really trek that probably don't appear to be that big now, but for most of us would be a life achievement. Can you tell us a little bit about what your ride was from Iran to PhD?
When I was 20 years old, my family and I, we all moved to United States. And back in Iran, I didn't have much options. My parents always told me you need to study engineering. And when I moved to US, I just continued studying engineering. I kind of didn't know that there are other options in the world. My whole goal in life was to get a job in engineering and have a good paycheck and have a car and have a house. And that was it. I only cared about I'm gonna get a good car and a good house and I'll be done. Like that's it. Or
Yeah.
maybe get married and have 2 kids and that's the end of it.
Right. Check, check, check. Done.
Check, I'm done. Like
Yeah.
I'm really like very soon I realized that I am participating in this boring I'm not gonna say boring, but in this circle of life, which is after this I'm gonna go for a better car, and after that I'm gonna go for one more kid, and then after that I'm gonna go for one more bedroom for the house, and then a nicer location. And I just thought this is gonna be a circle, and I'm gonna be sinking, kind of not doing everything only for myself. And I felt that I'm so selfish if I do that.
Mm-hmm.
That was the first spark for me to look into what's out there. How can I get out of this circle? How can I just do something that is bigger than this? And that's why, in the first place, I participated in landmark courses. I was just searching for an answer because I thought if I continue my life the way I'm continuing my life at that age, I would be they call it successful, and I'm doing quotations here.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I'm going to be successful, but just for myself.
Yes, yes. A very narrow definition of what the word successful means compared to what you're now taking on in your life.
Yeah, and then so I decided I back then that I don't want to do my PhD because it's gonna be part of the same circle,
Yes.
just more degrees and more degrees. But now the PhD that I'm doing every single day, it's all about how can I use this education to benefit other people. As a part of my PhD right now, I'm creating a leadership workshop for young women, college level women in Nepal. And hopefully, I can expand it to other developing countries and other countries. Before, it was just what I wanted to gain out of PhD was just to benefit myself solely. And now it is how can I use this for other people? And that was the transformation for me.
Absolutely and amazing. We're with Sarah Safari today, and if you haven't heard this whole podcast, please go back and listen to it because it's just astonishing. We met in Landmark Education. Although it's not, I'm not here to give a plug for the actual enterprise. Although both of us certainly could for the impact it's made on either in both of our lives. I wonder, you said that you reached a point where the life just looked like it was going to be circular, like cyclical, like a cycle that wasn't going to land on much, and you were looking for something outside of that, and that's how you tripped over Landmark Education. How long ago did you do the Landmark Forum?
2008.
2008 is your first course in Landmark, and then this the course that you took that launched you into mountain climbing as a
Yeah, that was wisdom in 2012.
okay, that was wisdom in 2012. Wow. One of the things I'm hearing is that the PhD in whatever might have been in the world of engineering, perhaps, it got shifted to being a PhD in leadership,
Mm-hmm.
and that you're now making a difference in ways that really matter to you and matter to the people around you. Can you pay a little bit more attention, if you will, to what, when you're used by your PhD education rather than doing it in order to, is there a difference in quality that you can notice?
Exactly. Like before, I wasn't, it was kind of, I was pushing, but now I'm being pulled by
Mm,
the whole PhD thing. It's more effortless.
yes.
It's more effortless because I'm so passionate and I love this cause so much. Studying for me for the past 4 years, it has never been a struggle.
Mm,
Even though English is my second language, PhD, all these PhD papers and articles are they use very sophisticated, complex words, and I have to use dictionary 24/7 to understand a whole article. But
hmm.
it is so effortless. I'll do it so happily because
Beautiful.
I'm enjoying every single second of it. It's not, for me, it's not going to school anymore.
I just imagine, I know that when we first met, I said something like this, but I imagine from inside of you, you can't really notice. I mean, sort of like you're on the moving train called Sarah Safari. So you cannot notice the impact and the inspiration that every single one of your activities, how you speak to it, and the level of passion and gentleness and sweetness and contribution that you are for the world around you is just extraordinary. I just thank you for being you. It's just fabulous. And thank you for everything you're doing for the people around you, and also for finding a way to live a life that isn't anything except the way you want to live your life, at the same time getting all of that done. It's just fabulous, really something.
Thank you. Thank you. And I really believe in that everybody on the whole planet, they have a cause, they have something that they can be used by, they can be pulled by. Like for your listeners, I'm sure a lot of them know about the sustainable developmental goals, the 17 SDGs that United Nations in 2015 adopted as the goals for the next 30 years. And it's 17 of them to end poverty, protect the planet, and ensure prosperity for all the countries, for the whole planet Earth. And before that, it was the millennial goals. So I'm sure there are many people out there, if they look up the 17 SDGs, number 4 is for women and gender equality. That's the one that I'm the most passionate about. But there are so many other ones for climate change, for animals, for all those kind of things. I think any person in the world, if they pick one or two of these 17 SDGs and try to do something really simple towards it. And when I say simple, I really mean simple. Like a lot of people ask me, what should we do for gender equality? We are very passionate about it. And I say, if you see a girl, if you see a woman, they're doing their best, they're trying so hard to put themselves out of their comfort zone, just say thank you to them, just acknowledge them, just tell them that you see how they're trying so hard, and ask them how you can support them. Because I'm passionate about this, but I'm sure there are people who are more passionate about recycling, helping the planet, passionate about the animals, or so many other things. If every single one of us just take a little bit of action and do something towards one of these 17 SDGs, we can accomplish so much. You know, they have estimated that by 2025, 89.5% of the world youth population will be in developing countries. So 90% of the world, of the youth in the world, will be in developing countries.
This
And
is it 5 years from now, yes?
yeah, 5 years
Wow.
from now.
Mm-hmm.
And so imagine 90% of the youth are in developing countries. People, these young people in developing countries, because I've been working with Nepal, Afghanistan, Iran, I've seen the youth in those countries, and I know how hungry and thirsty they are for our attention, to learn skills and develop themselves. A lot of them want to immigrate to this country, to United States. So this is just the state of the world, and I think we have so many immigrants here in United States, and they can be an asset and provide and be make a little difference in their original country, in the youth around them. I think little by little, this is the next generation that are coming up. We can save the earth this way, and we can save the whole planet. We can inspire our communities and just transform the whole planet.
Wow. It's the way you put it, coming from your 5'4" frame of somebody who's been up 7 summits and really continues to just expand into who you are as a contribution to, gender inequality, and who you are as a contribution to women's empowerment, and who you are just as a inspiration on a daily basis for why we even wake up in the morning, let alone, what we can do or who we can be in a day to make a difference. It's just extraordinary. And I know for me, my life is altering just inside of this interview, where I get reminded that there is a real opportunity to make a difference, and to have that coincide with what matters to me at the same time. Like, actually, those two things aren't two different things. And if I am living passionately down the line that works for me, it's very likely that I can make a massive difference and make a massive contribution to an area of life that matters to many. And I think that's what you represent more than anything for me. So thank you for that.
You're welcome. And younger people in developing countries, they are facing so many problems. They are being forced to early marriage. They face early pregnancy. They face malnutrition. They don't have access to education the way we do here. They don't have access to opportunities the way we do here. They, sexual exploitations, trafficking, HIV, like all these problems that they are facing in developing countries. They, like, when I meet our girls, the 300 girls that we have in Nepal, they are just so resilient, so powerful, so strong. They're pushing through all their difficulties and problems, and they're trying to achieve their goal. So the young people here in the United States, we are facing problems too, but not as much as developing countries. So I think
Yeah.
we don't have excuse. We are responsible and take the opportunities and the privileges that we have here. I think this just gives us more responsibility to take care of ourselves and the rest of the world.
Yes, beautiful. Amen again. Just wonderful. Exactly. So, Sarah, some of what we do, some of the questions that Ryan and I have developed to ask each and every guest it's already been answered. What tweaks you, and what you're doing about it, what could be done, and what can we, the audience, do to address whatever it is that tweaks you. And I think you've just given us a really beautiful outline of many different ways to be a contribution to the underprivileged or to those who are really asking, the hungry and thirsty for what it is that we might be able to offer, or even as an inspiration to create something new for people that matter, for people to contribute to and to be contributed from. So the other thing I want to really talk about is what's next for you. And I guess all we have next is a little climb up Mount Everest. And then once you get that baby done, what's waiting on the horizon for you? What can we look for from you over the next several years?
That's a very good question. For me, I'm just learning so much every single day, and the world is expanding in directions that I didn't even expect, that I don't know how next year would look like. I'm open to all these, whatever happens. Right now, we are working on a movie, a featured film about the story of the book to help inspire people and raise funds and awareness for empowering women in developing countries. And so the movie is happening. I'm writing my dissertation for my PhD. And then I'm also expanding my speaking business. I've been speaking in different organizations, companies, seminar or conferences. So everything is expanding and growing, and I'm learning a lot, and I'm meeting new amazing friends every day that I've never met before, and I never even had it in my radar. It's beautiful. It's amazing. Every day is a journey, and it's part of the journey. And I don't know, I'm just hoping that I can expand this enough that I can make a bigger difference in the world.
Yeah.
And I can make teams and groups of people in the world who are doing the same thing. Just I want to expand this idea of letting your cause use you and pull you towards life.
Yes,
That's
that's
it.
great. That's great. And Sarah, if people want to keep track of you, if people want to find out what you're up to next, or maybe even, speak with you or write to you, or maybe even work with you or join a cause that you're on, or get assistance with a cause that they might be considering, is that possible? And if so, how can people keep in touch with you, Sarah Safari?
Of course, I think the best way is to go on my website, climbyoureverest.org. And in there, I have all my accounts, different accounts, social media, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, my email, everything is there. People can email me and message me. And I try to be very responsive and answer very quickly. They want to have my email right now. My email is Sara, Sara, at empowernepalligirls.org.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wow, Sarah, what a great way to start off my podcast. Sort of like starting at the summit of Everest and wondering where to go from here if I want to keep going up. So it's just been a deep and honest pleasure to be with you.
Perfect. I really want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to share this story with the rest of the world, with your audience and listeners. I'm very, very thankful. This was an opportunity for me to do one of my favorite things in the world, which is hopefully making a difference here with your listeners. So thank you. I feel so honored, and I am so happy that I have a friend like you. Thank you.
Beautiful. Well, it is an honor indeed in reverse, or along with you, to be friends with you, Sarah Safari. I'm Dr. Fred. I'm Dr. Fred as founder of Welcome to Humanity and founder of Global Madness. And I've been here today with Sarah Safari. Sarah's got an amazing story, amazing contribution, an amazingly beautiful, wonderful person, human, woman, up to really making a difference in so many ways, and doing so with immense amount of commitment and rather effortlessly. And it appears to be effortless. In fact, it's more seamless. And I'm guessing a whole lot of effort goes into it every day. But when you're up to doing something that matters to you, when you're up to actually being used by something that matters to you, it doesn't translate to effort. And I think that's the point that Sarah brought forth earlier. with all that, we're up to making a difference too. We're up to making a difference in the world of mental health and mental illness. And that's what calls me forward. And that's what calls the people that work with me forward. If there's anything that is driving you forward, can you think of something that if that occurred, that would be something that would make your life worthwhile? I think you're hearing from both Sarah and me that there's no time better than today to actually take that on as being what's important. Living a life that's just going to end up not working out for you is always an option, except really you only have one life. And the opportunity really exists to make a huge difference on the planet just by living exactly what's important to you. So with all of that said, I just want to say this is Dr. Fred at welcometohumanity.net. It's been a pleasure to launch my inaugural podcast with my good friend Ryan Levesque and with my first guest star, Sarah Safari. So with that, I'm going to bid you all farewell. Thanks again, Sarah. Thanks again, Ryan. Really, really wonderful to get started with you. And I wish you all just a beautiful day, a beautiful week, a beautiful rest of your life. I love you. Be good. Bye for now.
Thank you.
Something I really loved about this interview with Sarah today is all about her courage. I mean, I really appreciated what she said about how things just seem to escalate step after step, and that she still doesn't see herself as necessarily courageous, just following steps into what is calling her. But my goodness, if you're not her, and none of us are, what an incredibly courageous woman. So an insight that really struck me from today's show was just follow your dream. Just follow what matters to you. Do not be afraid of what's going on around you, or if you are, simply take it with you into the unknown and create what's important. Leave yourself making a difference for the world around you. Something I intend to try or implement based on today's conversation with Sarah is exactly that. I'm expanding who I am in the world. My interest, my commitment is to be a listening such that everybody knows that their voice can be heard and that who they are and what they do matters. And I really am committed to the core of myself to making that happen for the people around me and then the people around them. So I'm committed to stepping off into the unknown and using Sarah as a primary example going forward. So perhaps as you were listening, you might have thought of a person or maybe even 2 or 3 or 4 people that need to hear this episode with Sarah Safari. Why not reach out to them right now and invite them to listen, to subscribe to the Welcome to Humanity podcast? And speaking of subscribing, I'd like to ask a favor of you, very large in terms of impact on me and the show and people around you. First, could you please take a moment to hit the subscribe button on your podcast player? That way you'll get the latest episodes as they become available. And second, if you really appreciate what we do here, could you just take 5 minutes to leave a review on Apple Podcasts? That sure would be deeply appreciated. Subscribing and reviewing are 2 major ways we can reach more listeners with the Welcome to Humanity podcast. And if this conversation we have here contributes to your life, please pay it forward by subscribing and then leaving a review. I and my team would be truly grateful for your support. And to catch up with past episodes, head on over to welcometohumanity.net. That's welcometohumanity.net/podcast. So until next time, this is Dr. Fred, and this has been the Welcome to Humanity podcast. Thank you so much for listening. I love you. Have a great day. Until we meet again, au revoir.
This is the Welcome to Humanity podcast with thought leader and transformative psychiatrist, Dr. Fred Moss. This show focuses on the betterment of humanity on a global scale. Each episode will leave you enlightened, inspired, and ready to make an impact in your world. Welcome to the show. Welcome to your life. Welcome to humanity. Here's Dr. Fred.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you're listening to us from, wherever you are. Well, it's Dr. Fred, and I'm the founder, the creator, the president of a couple different organizations, a couple different brands that are merging these days. So the 2 brands that I'm responsible for are the brand called Global Madness and Welcome to Humanity, which is what our biggest goals and biggest intentions as humans are always daily facing. Today, I am honored beyond belief, actually, to have the guest star that I have with us. And this man has no idea of the impact he has had on my own career taking forward and in both of those brands. Who I have today with us is, well, I'm going to let him introduce himself a little bit, but is Robert Whitaker. And I know Robert, I met with him on a couple of occasions in the Boston area, and we've spoken on a number of occasions on the telephone of ways that we can make a difference in the world, or really in a lot of our discussions, learning a little bit more from him about how he sees the world, because he's a true beacon for humanity and the mental health of the world as a whole is how I see you, Bob. Before we dive into today's conversation with my good friend and respected colleague, Robert Whitaker, I just want to take a minute to let you know that I finally have the audiobook version of my book called The Creative 8. So the book is written teaching a method for healing that uses creativity and self-expression as its primary modality. Since you're listening to the Welcome to Humanity podcast, I'm just going to send you a completely free copy of the audiobook as a thank you for doing just that. All you need to do is go to welcometohumanity.net/creative and download your copy. I've used this Creative 8 with psychiatric patients, coaching clients, and even with good friends, and I just get consistent, tremendous results. It's super easy, super fun, and it takes less than 5 minutes a day to implement. No kidding, I know you're going to love it. Give it a try, download it, see what you think. Go to welcometohumanity.net/creative and get a copy for yourself. Now, let's get back to our conversation with Robert Whitaker. So, welcome to our show. It's just great to have you today.
Fred, it's nice. Dr. Fred, I should say. It's very nice being here. So thanks for having me. And thanks for that overly nice introduction.
Well, why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are, a little bit about your books, a little bit what you're up to, a little bit about where do we find you these days? What's happening?
Well, I think the easiest way to explain this is, my background is as a journalist. I worked for newspapers for a long time and eventually had my own publishing company. But about 22 years ago now, I began writing about psychiatry in different forums, first in a series for the Boston Globe, and then in a book called Mad in America. That was published in 2002. Then I wrote a book called Anatomy of an Epidemic in 2010. Related to psychiatry.
Let me interrupt you for 1 second. Yeah. Just because you're not allowed to give the level of impact that both of those books have had on the millions of people who have picked it up and read it. I just want my listeners, if they haven't heard of either Mad in America or Anatomy of an Epidemic, to understand that I find both of those books to be truly epic, Bob. And I get that you might think that's an overstatement of, who you are for the world, but truly world-changingly epic in its courage and in its frankly, it's easy to read writing style, as well as just taking on some things that most people don't even know they could talk about. So thank you for writing both of those books 20 years ago, really.
Well, one was 2002 and the other was 2010. That's very kind, Fred. Let me explain why I think they have had an impact, and they have had an impact. And that is, societies organize their thinking, and in this thinking around psychiatry and psychiatric care, around narratives, right? And they're sold a certain narrative. And the conventional narrative, which I once believed in, of course, is that psychiatry, and this is a narrative that really formed in the 1980s and 1990s, is that psychiatry was making this great progress in understanding the biology of mental disorders. And they now knew that depression and schizophrenia and ADHD were caused by chemical imbalances in the brain. And they had drugs that could fix those chemical imbalances, like insulin for diabetes. And finally, that these, quote, diseases were underdiagnosed and undertreated. And that was a story that kicked off an extraordinary expansion of the psychiatric enterprise in terms of the number of people diagnosed, the number of people treated, and frankly, societal spending on psychiatric conditions. Now, I believe that narrative, but what these two books have done, Mad in America and Anatomy of Epidemic, have looked at that narrative in various ways and shown that that is a false narrative, is basically what I'm going to say. And so what you find in history, lived experience, and science, that stretches back to 1955, is that narrative of chemical imbalances was just a marketing narrative. It was not a scientific narrative, and it actually was belied by science. In other words, we weren't really finding out what are the biological, pathways to or biological causes of these disorders, or even that there were necessarily biological causes. We didn't find that people were suffering from chemical imbalances. We didn't find that these drugs fix chemical imbalances. And finally, when we really look at how these medications affect long-term outcomes, you see quite clearly that this is a form of care that increases the likelihood that someone will become chronically ill, increases the likelihood that a person will move from a milder diagnosis to a more severe diagnosis, say from depression to bipolar. And you see that as we've embraced this narrative, the burden of mental illness has risen dramatically in our society. And it's changed us as a people. It's changed how we raise our kids. It's changed how we think about ourselves. It's changed our sense of inner resilience and so forth. So I think the reason those books did have an impact, and you're right, they have had an impact, is because what I really did was say, okay, here's the conventional narrative. And then Mad in America goes all the way back to colonial times. Mm-hmm. And then just see if that conventional narrative, that conventional history is supported, in fact, by science. And what you find, and I want to add one thing, and by the lived experience of people who end up being treated. Yeah. But as much as anything, by science. And what you find is over and over again that a real digging into the science doesn't support the conventional narrative. And that is particularly true for the past 40 years. And, hopefully I've been able to present that science in a way that is accessible to the general audience, the general readership, and they can see that the science belies the conventional narrative. And once you understand that, once you see that, a couple of things become clear. First of all, there's a sense of betrayal that you had a medical specialty in concert with pharmaceutical companies that sold us a false narrative. That's not something that a medical specialty is supposed to do. And then the second thing is you see that the fact that we organized ourselves around that narrative, that these are discrete diseases, they need to be treated with drugs, has really impacted our society and in a negative way. And that leads you to the sense, okay, what can we do differently? And that's a question of everything from philosophy to what makes us human. How do we help each other? It's a big, profound question. And honestly, I do think Anatomy, those two books helped us, not just in the United States, but other places, start asking that question and start thinking about what alternatives we can build and alternative conceptions we can embrace. And that is indeed happening. And finally, just to finish this, I started the Mad in America website really with that idea that the website could help us understand that we have organized ourselves around a false narrative. And at the same time, it could be a forum for, okay, if that's so, what should we do differently? What are different approaches to staying well, mental health, and helping people who are struggling with their minds? And that's the purpose of the website. And one of the things that has been really gratifying is that having this forum and having these books have helped stir change and really sort of dramatic changes, on the ground changes. And Fred, you visited one when you visited Israel and saw their Soteria home. So I think that's the way to introduce myself is I was a reporter who looked into this story about the chemical imbalances, et cetera, found it to be false and made that known based on their own science. And that is leading us to a point we can start considering alternatives and other possibilities.
Simply beautiful, Bob. I really appreciate it. And again, I thank you for the really succinct and exquisite overview of the books and what your intention was, as well as an honest and humble view of the impact that your books and then the narrative that followed your books is having on the world around us. I mean, amen. God help us in these areas, because for the listeners who might not have heard this, shortly after it was created, we're in the midst of the United States being sort of swept over by what is being called a pandemic or an epidemic to the larger proportion. And that's obviously the coronavirus. And there's something about, your title of your book, sort of like the titles of both of my brands, The Global Madness and Welcome to Humanity. Your title of your book sort of becomes even larger in the face of an epidemic, especially. So both of your titles are in some ways really, I guess, associated with both of my titles. The Global Madness and Mad in America, Welcome to Humanity, and Anatomy of an Epidemic are interesting correlates of each other. And I wonder if you can comment a little bit off the cuff about the epidemic that really preceded. We're talking about an epidemic, Bob, even before coronavirus shows up, that you declared, or that you and I declared, or that many declared was already here before this notion of coronavirus struck. Like there was an epidemic.
Yeah. So where did I get that title from? Anatomy of an Epidemic. Or why don't I start with Mad in America?
Yes.
So Mad in America is a play on word, because what I found when I began doing that history book is there was this story told by those who do the treating, the psychiatrists and the pharmaceutical companies, and then, about antipsychotics and about how they, quote, psychotics should be treated, how the mad should be treated. And then I went ahead and interviewed, this was the beginning part of this whole story, people with that diagnosis of schizophrenia or some other psychotic disorder, and who'd been in mental hospitals. And yeah, they were mad, and they were mad about how they had been treated.
Right. Like furious mad.
Mad about the stories they had been told. And the very drugs that the antipsychotics that were being preached as sort of curative for schizophrenia, making it possible for people to live normal lives. So many people who had been treated with the drugs told of drugs that turned them into zombies, that made it impossible for them to feel the world, to move about the world, to care. And so they had to reject that story in order to get their lives back. Mm-hmm. Now, we never hear the voice of those people in sort of larger society, but that's the play on words in that title, is that you have people designated as mad, and you go meet them, and yeah, they're the mad in America, and they're also mad about how they're being treated and the stories that have been told about them and the stories that have been told about these drugs. So that's the first book. Now, The Anatomy of an Epidemic is expanded. So the Mad in America was really looking at people with psychotic disorders and that whole story. So since 1980, and really beginning in 1987, that conventional narrative, as I mentioned, was that we've discovered these things are diseases like depression, ADHD, and we need to get more people treated, and that's what we're doing. And now, normally in medicine, if you identify the pathology of a disease, and then you develop a treatment that is specific to that pathology, you should expect that the burden of that disease becomes less in society. And you should expect that the people who get treated have better outcomes than they otherwise would have.
Yeah. You got to hope for that, Bob, at the very minimal.
Oh, and expect it, right? When you identify a pathology and develop a treat for it, you can expect that outcomes will improve. Well, so what I did in this book is look at the number of people disabled as a first step by mental illness in 1987. In other words, they were receiving a government disability payment due to mental illness. And at that time in 1987, there were 1.25 million people receiving a disability for that purpose. Now we get this expansion of the psychiatric enterprise. And by the time in 2008, when I was researching that book, it had reached 4 million adults who were on disability. In other words, a tripling of people who couldn't work because of disability. And how about children on disability? In 1987, there were 16,600 children in the United States who received, or their parents or guardians, received a disability payment due to a mental illness. By the time I was writing this book, it was over 600,000. So you see this expansion, and that's just in disability payments. If you look at all the markers of days lost, people on disability, you see since 1987, there's been, yes, an epidemic, an extraordinary expansion in the number of people who can't work, who are disabled by mental illness, who are struggling with it. And among the kids, for example, today at college campuses, something like 25-30% of incoming freshmen arrive with a diagnosis and a prescription for psychiatric drugs. Well, if you went back 30 years ago, it was a tiny percentage of people who entered campus in that state. So that's the reason for the use of the word epidemic, because in essence, we've had this extraordinary expansion in the number of people who are said to be ill with psychiatric diseases. Yeah. And by the way, just to put it a little bit, I think we're going through a terrible time with the coronavirus and all. But think about an expansion in disability from 1.25 million to 5 million, or 4 million in 2008. Today, we're over 5 million. That's telling of an extraordinary rise in disability.
Right. And not to mention, really, the distance between 16,000 and 600,000 is 25 times. And you're really looking at, and that's in the children that you spoke of that were disabled,
By the way,
that are now disabled.
that's 40 times almost.
Oh, I guess it is. You're right. Thank you.
So,
And that's the group that's entering college now. A lot of those people 12 years later are looking at, maybe that's a little bit of the cohort you're talking about that are coming in with 25 or 30% of people diagnosed or taking
well, there's really two parts to this. So if you look at the kids who get put on disability before they're age 18, something like 2/3 of them go straight on to adult disability. And now they have a mental patient stretching ahead of them. The college kids are ones that may not have been ending up on disability, but they got diagnosed. They got identified as having ADHD, or they got identified as having depression or bipolar. And yes, a number of those kids that enter in college now through this gateway, a number of them will in fact go on to a disability. Mm-hmm. But even beyond that number of 25% arriving just shows the incredible expansion of diagnosing people with psychiatric disorders.
Right. So thank you. So one of the things I remember from our talk in Cambridge was when we met for breakfast that morning was that there's a question about, so I'm a psychiatrist, and not only am I a psychiatrist, I was a third year medical student in 1987. And that was the year that I went from being very eager to have communication and creativity and connection being the source of all healing to learning very quickly that Prozac, fluoxetine, had now blown into the market and was ready to be the panacea for all conditions everywhere. Right. And even consideration, as I recall, putting it in water systems as a possibility, like really getting that Prozac was the new and true answer to all of our disturbances.
Yeah, the new miracle drug.
Yeah, indeed. And on the cover all by itself of Newsweek, and on the cover all by itself of Time, as I recall, like really that green and white capsule that just dominated for the next several years and continues to dominate in reverberation. There's something more to this than just the medication, though, Bob. There's a question I want to ask you is, what is it about humanity that is eager to learn that there's something wrong with them? What is it about humanity who's eager to accept a diagnosis and then say, yep, there's something wrong with me. I'll continue to come back each and every month. Please give me confirmation of my suboptimal diagnosis and a treatment to assist me to at least get a sense that maybe there's hope I can get better, more whole, more perfect, something like that. Do you have an answer?
Well, it's a good question, a very good question. It's a complicated answer, I think. First of all, we are taught with whatever culture we're within to start identifying with certain stories, okay? So let's say I'm 18 and I'm miserable, or 17 and I'm miserable. Yeah. When I was growing up, it was just, okay, so you're 17 and you're miserable. You won't be miserable your whole life, but okay, that happens. No, there wasn't anything wrong with you. It was just like a stage or something.
Thank you. Exactly.
Okay, but now kids are being told, well, if you're miserable or if you don't like your classes and you're bored like crazy. I mean, I couldn't stand school for most of my life. No. Oh, there's something wrong with you, okay? So they're being sort of funneled down a different path of thinking, right? In some ways, they're just following a path that is being set out for them to think of themselves in this way. In other words, it isn't something that's desirable for them necessarily to do. Many people actually resist it. But nevertheless, that's one reason why people became eager to embrace it, because they were told to, they were encouraged to. The second thing is, though, if things aren't going well in your life, right, to accept this, it sort of absolves you of a certain sense of responsibility for creating your own life.
Isn't that true? I say that a lot. I use those exact same words, and it sort of lands true when I say it. And I know that it flies against the common prevailing conversation, but there is something to that, isn't there? We're kind of eager to relinquish the accountability for the creation of our own life if we have the opportunity to do so.
Yeah. I mean, here's the thing is, if you're suffering, right, or you're struggling, it can be really hard to make changes that can help you build a new life. And if you have a conception of yourself as these things happen and that you are responsible for yourself, then if you enter into a difficult period, you have to say to yourself, okay, what can I do differently to sort of get out of this? And that's that responsibility part. Mm-hmm. That's hard sometimes.
Yeah.
And that's difficult. And it challenges you to really sort of think inwardly and all and confront sometimes some difficult things. This was an easy out for some, and I don't want to be blaming anybody who accepts the diagnosis, okay?
Sure. Me neither, by the way. Not at all. Not at all.
It nevertheless, from a cultural point of view, gave everybody an excuse, okay? And by the way, for example, let's say, okay, ADHD. I'm not doing well in school. Okay.
Exactly.
Now because there's something wrong with your brain. Okay, so that becomes a little bit of an excuse for the child and the parent, but also gives the school an excuse. Maybe the reason you have so many kids who are bored and not paying attention is because your school sucks.
Exactly.
So it actually gives society an excuse as well not to do things that would make more supportive environments. So it works in many different ways. It works for the individual, but it also works for society to give itself a pass. And, Fred, if I can, this is going to seem a little bit odd, but let's see if I can. I will give you something that somebody told me in college. And I actually think it was worth going to college just to take this one sentiment in. This teacher told our class, he said, by the time you're a certain age, you're responsible for your face. Now, what did he mean by that? Because we often think, I'm either handsome or I'm beautiful and I was sort of born this way and that sort of thing. What he was trying to say is the inside of you, your kindness, your empathy, your warmth, your curiosity, your decency, eventually all gets reflected in your face. And that begins to take over whether or not you're born with a sort of a face that is particularly seen as beautiful or whatever. I honestly believe that's true. And I understood it was a metaphor for how we choose to go about the world and interact with each other and care about each other starts to inhabit our being. It starts to inhabit our mind. And so we can start to make choices that actually will make our insides a sort of more comforting place or a more difficult place, that sort of thing. In other words, this goes back into this responsibility of being in that growing up is difficult. Coming to terms with your brain is difficult because the human mind is an uncomfortable place. I mean, we're meant to be anxious. We're meant to be moody. And if you can get that sense of being alive, that, we're meant to be anxious. We're meant to be moody. Even going psychotic is sort of within the human possibility, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
Once you have that sense of self, then you can start saying to yourself, well, what do I need to do to sort of take care of myself, to move about the world better and so forth. So I'm not blaming anybody for accepting the diagnosis, but that whole story did become an excuse for taking responsibility for self for many people. And it became an excuse for society as well, not to build a more just society, not to build better schools, not to provide people with shelter and that sort of thing. And by the way, Fred, if you look sometimes where the happiest societies are, they're societies that have tried to build a more just society, build a more caring society, et cetera.
Mm-hmm. When you talk about the construct of the system that actually is supported, that keeping this in place supports its own infrastructure. For instance, that the schools and the parents and the kids and the vulnerable person in the center, as well as the doctors and the pharmacology, some people blame big pharma. It's only one piece of the whole thing. The hospitals, the whole system gets its due. It's like there is the excuse or whatever you want to, the ramifications piece by piece is that there is many benefits, sort of perverse benefits to keeping this incredibly extensive, intricate construct in place. There's some benefits,
Absolutely.
In each and every
There's commercial benefits. I mean, obviously providing a psychiatric service, mental health services has exploded. So that's its own sort of industry, so to speak. I mean, I don't want
multi-billion-dollar industry.
You have that as grown up.
Yeah.
We were talking about it. It does provide an excuse. So like if you don't have a just society or if you have someone working at a low wage and they're miserable, it's their fault. It's not society's fault, right?
It is.
So it really fits a neoliberal agenda where the responsibility for everything, whether someone's happy or not, it's located in the person's head. And so it's That's the problem within the person's head. It's not by what are the in-between spaces we create. So society gives itself a pass, and then it's a philosophy of being, frankly, in my opinion, that does encourage sort of a weakness within ourselves, thinking that we don't have the resilience, we don't have the capacity to make changes. And it also leads us to not have faith in our children, to grow up and become self-reliant and that sort of thing. So there's so many dimensions to this that can be explored, but all those dimensions also all come back to this sort of same beginning problem, and that is that we've organized ourselves around a false narrative, and it's not just a narrative of medicine, it's a narrative of being, a philosophical narrative of what it means to be human. And in this narrative, this new narrative, in the narrative that we organized ourselves around, it was pathological to grieve too much, or to be too anxious, or to be depressed. And emotions, or even to be too happy. Sure, you're not supposed to be too happy. You're supposed to be just sort of okay. So that's a philosophy of being.
Yes. Okay. And even finding that little hole where you don't meet any criteria for any diagnosis is really tiny. It's a very tiny hole. And yeah, it's an extraordinary setup. It's an extraordinary construct. And I want to take us into now, and then I'm going to take us into maybe asking a little bit for your visionary expertise. But in the now, one of the things I'm noticing, I'm continuing, probably a little bit surprising to you, but anyways, I have a telepsychiatric practice that's a tail ending now in Illinois. And so I live in Los Angeles, and then each and every day, including right now, you're on my lunch break, I see, hear, listen to, or take care of those who call themselves or who are called psychiatrically affected or ill or with a diagnosis. And so today, for instance, most people didn't come, no one so far has come into the clinic. But because of the rapid growth of the audiovisual technology that's now available for us on the internet, some are able to do this online versus telepsychiatrically with using Skype variants. Others are seeing me, I put seeing in quotes here, by telephone only. They're seeing their doctor by telephone only. Okay, that's a new baseline.
Yeah.
And this is interesting because these people are holed up. They're in their lockdown. They are home with their family that they've never been with. They are finding some forms of challenges, and many of them are finding forms of peace or of ways to manage day-to-day living that are reductionistic in nature, but have them discovering things that maybe they had either forgotten about or just simply didn't even know existed. In what is nature, or what is it to be with my son, or how about my dogs, or what about taking care of my mom? And some of the things I'm finding, maybe even specifically this morning, are using something I like to call be excellent or self-compassion, like really getting that you are exactly who you are and you're not anything different than who you are. And it's completely awesome that you are exactly who you are. And starting right now, your next move could be entirely beautiful because you actually know what that is. And you could do that even in the face of any kind of external circumstances that are affecting you. So that's a therapeutic model that I'm using with unbelievable results, to be honest. Unbelievable results, call after call. Unbelievable. Love it. Now, it's sort of like backing up into, oh my goodness, I really am me and happy to be me and able to do things from this me that otherwise I didn't even, I've been walking around knowing that I'm ill, and then now I can be compassionate about myself and take care of the people around me and myself in different ways. So my question to you is, do you see how maybe our present lockdown situation, worldwide lockdown that's going on right now, or whatever was going on, maybe as we turn the corner here, and my heart goes out to those who are suffering at the very highest level right now, and there are hundreds of thousands, if not millions, who are. Do you see this as a time for a transition? Is this a challenge? Is this a possibility that we're maybe in a cocoon? Maybe are we on our way out to something that will offer hope and possibility? I guess there's the present and future question for you to.
That's really interesting, Fred. Like everybody else, I'm reading constantly about this. This, I think, I've never experienced this in my life, right? This shutdown and all, this sort of like global crisis. And I think a couple things. It will change us. I think this is the sort of thing that changes people's thinkings, behaviors, etc. because the world will be different when we emerge from this. I mean, our experiences will be different and that sort of thing. I think it can lead to phenomenal change. You know, we've been in a period of extraordinary selfishness, in my opinion, where everything's about getting wealthy and that sort of thing. And what you do see, I think, with this pandemic is it requires a cooperative solution that's not just national, but international, right? So we all see ourselves in this moment as struggling with the same difficulty, the same threat. So it is a real moment to feel
unified.
Yeah, unified and a sense of shared destiny, so to speak.
Yes.
That I think is really unusual and could be really, really healthy. Now, combining that to the individual teleservices that you're giving or telecounseling or whatever you want to call it, that anyway, what you're doing is over the internet. I honestly have mixed feelings about this, and let me explain why. When I've done my reporting and I ask people who are now doing better, what do you see helped you get better? And I'm talking about people who've been in mental hospitals and often been diagnosed with schizophrenia or whatever. Virtually everyone said, I had somebody who started listening to me and started believing in me, and that helped me regain a sense of self that was more positive, which is what you're talking about. The transformation of one's identity and sense of self, and by the way, even their own narrative of their lives. So often they had come to have a narrative of their lives where they were a failure, they were afraid of the world, and they ended up isolated, fearful. And in this process of having someone caring for them and helping them see themselves in a different light, it changed their own sense of who they had been, so to speak, their own past narrative.
Right.
Now, the only reason I say so if that can be done across internet lines, that's great. And by the way, I think you're right. There's a chance that within these sort of confined spaces and being with each other, there's a chance for one's own sense of self in response to their immediate social situation to change as well. In other words, their relationship with parents, loved ones, that sort of thing. The only reason I'm hesitant is I'm such a believer in personal contact. In other words, what happens to us when we sit with another human being and we look into their eyes and we see how they're responding to us. There's a lot of data that says so much about how we respond to people isn't actually with the words. It's how we look at each other and what we are getting from their faces, these sort of unconscious clues. Are they really interested? That sort of thing. So I'm worried about a form of care that removes that personal contact. But maybe what happens is through their talking to you, they say, oh, maybe I need to go out and get some personal contact with other people. And I need maybe I should, and I'm talking about when this pandemic ends, maybe I need to go volunteer for a homeless shelter, or maybe I need to go volunteer for an animal shelter. I need to get involved in this. So maybe what happens is, as part of this change in the sense of self and the change in narrative, they can take that from your telecounseling or whatever you want to call it and change their immediate reality and their environment. I don't know. Maybe that's what happens. Right. But I do believe that human contact is so essential.
Right. So this is a place where you and I have had a discussion before. And I think my line in the sand is in a slightly different space than this that I'd like to speak towards. And that is, again, as you and I have discussed, if I have an opportunity in most settings, if I have an opportunity to be in the same room with somebody or to put them into the next room on a computer that has good audio visual equipment, the next room, and have our session that way, I would definitely choose B. Definitely, without question, for intimacy's sake, in order to get intimacy, actually. Because what's there is this, what I like to call disinhibition syndrome, an idea that, we're not wired to be self-protective in front of a box. So what really shows up is an unbelievable close-up of every single nuance while we're looking at each other or thinking, we're looking at pixels, obviously. We're not truly looking at each other, but we're looking at each other in closer to that person, both physically and in many ways. I get to see all the nuances of their body and be with in listening and seeing every piece of them telepsychiatrically. I have done my very, very, very best work telepsychiatrically, way better than anything I've ever done on the ground. I've been on the ground for those 40 years, and I would choose that. Now, that's me. Now, where the next line is, though, is I think points to exactly what you're talking about. My discomfort from switching that to phone is real significant. Like the conversations I've had today. This is real. I have no idea. There's no longer confidentiality. There's no longer, what are you saying that's different than what your body said? I don't have that anymore. And even as you and I speak now, I have no idea what you're really up to. We're just trading voices and listening with each other at this point. Right. And we really lose multiple gorgeous dimensions that are required for true and honest connective communication. And for me, that's where the line gets drawn of unacceptability or of backing up. But towards the idea of being with somebody, it's still highly available in these audio-visual experiences, as long as video is of a high quality.
Well, you're the one who's experienced it, so we should be listening to you.
Well, I have experienced it, and almost all my patients would agree with me. And it's really something that's counterintuitive, apparently, because most people are like, no, I want to be with, until they do it. And then they're like, no, that was the best session I've ever had. And I hear that over and over again. So it is something that not necessarily taking away from that intimacy that comes with being with another person.
Well, all I can say on that is, if you want to evaluate the merits of something, you can listen to the provider, the therapist, psychiatrist, but you also want to check in with the person who's receiving the therapy, so to speak, and value what they say. And so if your people are saying this is the best, that's high praise and worth listening to.
Yes, it is. And I think I wrote an article myself called Telepsychiatry, The Future Is Now. I wrote that 4 years ago, really pointing at all this. And as you know, I wrote Global Madness last year, what it would take for us to unite, talking essentially about a global threat being what was required for us to all stand in the same direction. And it seems like there's some soothsaying in both of those things, both of those articles. Bob, I'm going to ask you a question here. And as we get prepared to sort of taper off and wind down, first of all, thank you for just our openness. And I love being with you and speaking with you. Good. So the next question I have is, so Bob, let's say things turn out exactly like perfect. I mean, why wouldn't they? Let's say that things turn out exactly as they should. And is it 1 year from now or 3 or 5 years from now? We have a new world order. We have now emerged through the grief and loss and through the changes and transformations and through the survival and non-survival of those who come through this. And now we've adjusted. Is there a life on the other side of this that has our approach to mental illness as a nation or as a world being more healthy than what it was leading up to now?
Wow. Here's how I'm going to connect these two. And looking through history past and history forward. If you look, in my opinion, through Western history, for the best form of, quote, care, helpful and humanistic and what's the word for it? More, I don't even know, but at least humanistic. In my opinion, it is
holistic.
Yeah. Well, anyway, the part that I'd like to see, and I'll tie this into our current epidemic in a second, comes from the Quakers in the early 1800s, and it all stems from this. The mad are brethren. They are us. They're not apart. Mm-hmm. They're not the other. And once we conceptualize people who are struggling this way as us, as brethren, we start saying, well, how would we like to be treated? And of course, the Quakers said, well, we need to have shelter. We need to have social events. We need to have good food, exercise, that sort of thing. And they built their first asylums around that principle. But the key here, as I'm talking about, is so often in the history of mental health and psychiatry, you draw a line between the other. There are the well, and then there's the sick, and once we start describing people as the other, that's when you get the stigma. That's when you get the horrible therapies. That's when you get sort of abuse and robbing people of civil rights and stuff. So the question is, are people different from us, or are they us? And if we have a sense of the spectrum of humanity includes those who are extremely depressed or extremely moody or manic or even psychotic, and it's just part of the human spectrum, and we can get back to the sense of brethren, that leads to a whole different way of organizing our societies and also taking care of those who are really struggling. So I think the pandemic is helping promote this idea. The humans on this earth are a species, right? And we actually have a responsibility to try to create a better global environment. You talk about global mental health. And that means we have a responsibility to care for the environment, to try to care for each other that transcends national boundaries, that we don't see, oh, those people are the other and we want to go to war with them, et cetera. Right now, we're all in this together globally, right?
Yes, we really are.
So I guess my hope is that there'll be a sense of more global shared needs, shared responsibilities, and that out of that also in terms of when we talk about, quote, the mentally ill, we reconceptualize of, hey, human beings exist along a spectrum and everyone they're us, they're brethren. And then how can we build systems of care that reflect that belief?
Yes, these are fascinating. Thank you for that. These are fascinating times for which I can spin on a dime and start being like, wow, the humans I know up until now aren't built to manage what it is that's now for us to take on. And so transformation of the human race from what we were walking into this to what is required to take this on successfully appears to be what is in order, appears to be what is required, like really getting that the us and them needs to be set aside or at least retired. And that when we start seeing we as a group of 7.8 billion of us and all of them are me, then a whole new perspective gets initiated that allows for precisely this type of transformation, perhaps. And sometimes I get like super excited, confident that this really is the metamorphosis cocoon that we are going through that will lead to a new world that offers ways of looking at mental illness such that maybe it doesn't even, that has a different name. It's not that anymore. Yeah. And we really put an end to it.
Yeah. In some ways, you could see this pandemic as a little bit of a trial run for responding to the global climate change crisis.
Isn't that true?
Because you can't do it individually. You can't do individual countries. And you have to see all of humanity as stewards of the earth, right? So if we see ourselves as tribes that need to compete for resources, competing with each other for fresh water and the chance to burn fossil fuels and stuff, well, we'll all go down together eventually, right? But this pandemic is requiring a global response. And maybe it is a trial run for how we can confront the challenges of global climate change, because we need to work together. And as part of that, once we understand that we're in this together, that extends to all of us, in terms of who's mentally ill and who's not mentally ill. We become part of a sense of a human tribe that has very many different dimensions. And maybe we should appreciate that fact that human beings can be so incredibly different.
Isn't that great? Us human beings who are the same.
Exactly. That's the way to put it. Different and yet very much the same.
Yes. Unbelievable. Thank you for just such an entertaining and such an informative and beautiful interaction, Bob Whitaker. So Bob is a friend of mine, and Bob is a stalwart stand for I guess a mentally healthy world, or a world that sees itself as such. And he's been my guest today. We've had a great discussion. Bob, if people want to know a little bit more about you or about Mad in America or about how to become involved, or even how to watch you or how to learn about you and some of the work that you've done and who you are in the world, how might they reach out for you?
Well, first of all, they can go to madinamerica.com, which is the website, and you'll see a thing on the menu bar that says about us, how to get involved. So that's a first step. Listen, I'm really approachable. You can always email.
I know.
Just email me and I'll email you back. So
isn't that great?
And answer any questions, whatever. Obviously, in terms of understanding where I come from, reading the books, Mad in America and Anatomy of an Epidemic.
Strong recommendation from me.
And I co-wrote a book called Psychiatry Under the Influence. You can read that one too. So that's a start. But there's a lot of ways to know about me. Go to the website, read the books, email me, whatever is good.
Awesome. Is there anything else you'd like to say, Bob?
I just want to say thank you for having me on. It's been a great discussion. I really enjoyed it.
Awesome. Beautiful. It's been great having you. It's Welcome to Humanity. Another version has just been dropped down into our podcast. It's been a pleasure to be with you. I love you all. Not only are we going to get through this, we're going to get through this like today. Like the next move you make can be terrific. It really can. You know what that is. The next move you make can be amazing. It can be outstanding. It can be exceptional. You can actually make that move right now and be that person. And then let me know how that goes. Do that a couple times a day, see what happens. So welcome to humanity. Dr. Fred signing off for now. I've had a great time with you today. I'm wishing all is well for you. And even when it's not, this too will pass. And just keep bringing your love forward. Bye for now, folks. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Wasn't that just awesome? I mean, I really love this man. He was really a launching tool for me to create the Welcome to Humanity podcast, the Welcome to Humanity brand, the Global Madness brand. This is the man who actually fed me the line that my job was, in no small part, to transform the narrative of mental illness on a global scale. So I really appreciate Robert Whitaker. And boy, is he fun to talk to. So smart, so brave, so loving of humanity. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. And while you were listening, maybe you thought, I have a friend or two who really needs to hear this episode. If that's the case, why not reach out to them right now and invite them to listen to this episode and to subscribe to the Welcome to Humanity podcast. And while you're at it, I'd like to ask you a favor. Could you just take a moment and hit the subscribe button on your podcast player? That way you'll get the latest episodes as they become available. And if you really appreciate what we're doing here, go ahead and take a few minutes and leave a nice review on Apple Podcasts. Definitely appreciate that, because subscribes and reviews are the two best ways that we can reach more listeners with the Welcome to Humanity podcast. So if the conversations we're having here contribute to your life, if they move you forward, if they're meaningful to you, if you just simply enjoy them, go ahead, play it forward, subscribe, and leave a review. To catch up on past episodes, just go right on over to welcometohumanity.net/podcast and download whatever episode you like. Until next time, this is Dr. Fred. This has been another amazing edition of the Welcome to Humanity podcast. I certainly appreciate you being here. Thank you for listening. I love you. Take care of yourself. Take care of your family. Stay safe. Enjoy life. We'll see you on the go around. Bye for now, everyone.
Well, I really like to speak in public. And what I really like is the larger the group, the more people learn from each other. Oftentimes, when people come to the front of the room, you don't know it, but what they have to say hits you in a very deep way. So people learn from each other new ways of being that otherwise had never been explored. As a role of consultant, my job is to listen and to provide new possibilities for the people who are having areas of life where they're stopped or where they're simply in a quandary. In the world of speaking, one of the things I bring forth is the process of inquiry. And what I mean by that is, if we get to an answer, we've actually gotten off the road. What we move forward with is asking questions, creating new possibilities, moving forward into creating new ways of looking at things that otherwise we thought we had answers to. Another thing about being a public speaker is when someone comes to the front of the room and shares, or someone raises their hand and shares, whether it be a question or an area in life that they're working with, oftentimes many people, 20 or 30 other people in the room, are sharing the exact same concerns. So this person becomes a spokesman for all these other people in the room, and in the speaking and in the interaction, new ways of being emerge. I find that when I step into that with a new set of ears, a new way of thinking about things, a new way of being, all sorts of new possibilities become available. Sometimes people will attend places where I'm speaking or where I'm consulting, and it won't be about them. It'll be about someone they know, someone in their family, a friend, someone that they're concerned about with respect to mental illness. This isn't the only model that works anymore. We are societal beings. We are communicative beings. And in fact, when we're with more than one person, we can learn and we can transform. And because one-to-one isn't the only workable model, I can impact a great number of people in speaking, consulting, and advising positions that otherwise were thought to not be able to have the simple, intimate effect that a one-to-one relationship does. One of the big questions we have is, what is mental illness? What is normalcy? And both of these things are entirely unclear and vague. Over the last 100 years, the one-to-one model, coming in and being seen by one person at a time, is the model that's been utilized. Transformation is an instantaneous experience, one that comes when you realize that mental illness isn't something that actually exists as you thought it was. The larger goal of the work that I'm doing is to reframe and alter the conversation of mental illness on a global scale. If you're involved with an organization and this is interesting to you, please reach out to me. If it's a good match, I'm available to speak to a group of any size, from 2 to 1,000, looking at different ways of exploring this notion of mental illness and exploring new ways of creating freedom, self-expression, and creativity moving forward. Instantaneous transformation is actually available.
Hi there, I want to encourage you to talk at depth to one of my great friends, an important thought leader, an original, a maverick, an innovative, a creative superstar who's a doctor of all kinds of doctoring. He is a doctor named Dr. Fred Moss. He is beyond brilliant, beyond well-connected. He doesn't think out of the box because he was never in the box. Some people call him the UnDoctor doctor. But in addition to being a healer, he's a business thought leader, communicator, networker, innovator, and a guy who goes from seminar to seminar. And I'm one of the, you know me best as the world's best-selling author, creator of, or co-creator of Chicken Soup for the Soul and the Ask book series and the 1 Minute Millionaire book series and a lot more, and sold over 500 million books. So I know creativity when I see it, and I know innovation when I hear it. And at my zenith, I had 397 employees. So I have some feeling for this, you know, and each of us has a feeling for something different. And obviously I have a feeling for innovation because we kept re-innovating and getting what's called the S-curve in business to go up. Well, that's the kind of individual that Fred Moss is. And I encourage you to give him your time and just meet with him, at least on the phone, or better yet on a Zoom. And best of all, if you can physically synchronize in time and space with him, and you're going to thank him in your prayers for that meeting as your business, your life, your enterprise, your network, or your charity becomes infinitely better off, because he'll help you be all you can be, do all you can do, and have all you can have in the instantaneity of time, and have fun, pleasure, and joy doing it.